So our favorite Mohammed Hijab released another podcast in November, and it was a pretty interesting one. He interviewed a 17-year-old Muslim trans woman named Alia. Alia is a transgender Muslim. Now I know you are already asking why. Why stick to this religion that doesn't support LGBT rights? But it's not my business why she believes in Islam. Like I've said 100 times, I don't care what you believe. What I care about is how you treat others. So let's get into it.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, and welcome to the 10th episode of the MH podcast, where it's been quite a controversial podcast. For the time, what we've been doing, for those who don't know about the MH podcast, we've been bringing Muslim academics on, we've been bringing different people on, but now we wanted to kind of expand the range a little bit and bring an interesting guest. Aliyah, how are you?
I'm good. How are you?
Yeah, not bad. So, Liam, as far as we know from looking at your social media, your Twitter and other accounts, you're transgender. You identify as a transgender Muslim.
Woman, yes.
Yeah. So, can you just tell us about your story? Like, what happened growing up? When did you make this decision? Was it a decision to be made in the first place?
I'm your friendly ex-Muslim, Abdullah Samir. Now, before getting into my response to this podcast, I want to first start by defining for our viewers what the term transgender means and how gender dysphoria is a recognized condition which we should acknowledge and respect in our society. The issue of transitioning as a preteen, allowing transgenders in sports, transgender washrooms, and other such issues are separate, and I'm not tackling them here. Here we are simply discussing adult transitioning. I also want to acknowledge that I'm not an expert on this topic, and I apologize if I say something hurtful or offensive in advance, or if I misspeak about transgender issues. Feel free to leave a comment if I said anything wrong. These topics are important to discuss, and I want to do my best to give it its due justice. According to the NHS website, gender dysphoria is a term that describes a sense of unease that a person may have because of a mismatch between their biological sex and their gender identity. Another website defines it as a deep internal sense that the gender of their body does not fit with the gender they identify with. This distress can range from manageable to debilitating, causing problems with family, friends, school performance, as well as depression, anxiety, self-harm, and in the worst cases, suicide. It's not just a trend or a phase. Gender dysphoria is a serious and persistent condition, psychiatrically distinguishable from other issues of gender expansive expression or confusion or sexual orientation that may normally occur during childhood or adolescence. This sense of unease or dissatisfaction may be so intense that it can lead to depression and anxiety and have a harmful impact on daily life. Simply put, when someone's internal identity or self-expression does not align with societal expectations and characteristics associated with their biological sex, that person is recognized as trans. They are not ill or confused or misguided. They're normal, self-aware human beings and deserve to be treated as such. Hijab starts off by asking Alia about her childhood, how she came to identify as trans, and the experiences which led to that. It starts off decent, but we all knew it wasn't going to last.
Right. So when you felt homosexual urges or whatever it may be, growing up, did you ever say to yourself did you ever identify as a homosexual? At least
Yes.
yourself?
Yes.
So now post, let's say transformation or this, now that you've decided to be trans, do you consider yourself homosexual or do you consider yourself straight?
I consider myself a heterosexual woman.
Right. So your sexuality has changed.
I wouldn't say the sexuality change. I would say the label to the sexuality change, because homosexual means a man that is attracted to a man, but I'm no longer a man.
That's quite interesting because a lot of people, this is kind of a sticking point for a lot of people. So a lot of people say, well, you know, I'm born gay and there's no way of changing that. But so on your model, in a sense, you can change it. If you change your gender, you change your sexuality as well.
Well, I wanted to go back to when you said when I decided to be trans. It wasn't like, it's not that I like change something. It was more of discovering the fact that I'm trans.
It seems like hijab was looking for a gotcha here, because some transgender individuals are also attracted to the same sex they were born into. Easy enough to understand, at least for me. She didn't change her sexuality, she is still attracted to men, but she's now calling it something different, i.e. the label change. Hijab wanted a gotcha and he didn't get it. Yet he is focused on establishing that one can control or change their sexuality at will. Unfortunately, not surprising at all, considering how alternate sexualities and gender identities are depicted as a self-controlled personal failing in Islam. Well, either that or the good old shaitan at work here. There's no evidence for this claim. Sexuality is stable from puberty on. Whatever you are at puberty, there's no turning back. Muhammad obviously didn't know this, and it wasn't part of his great plan of having a gigantic ummah with lots of babies.
So let me ask you a question. Why do you associate long-haired mammals, human beings, with femininity, for example?
I just do. Like, either there could be the argument that it's a social role because, you know, I saw it on TV and I wanted it, and you know, it was whatever was the media. But to me, like, it's just what I want. Like, I don't know how to describe it. It's just like natural.
But here's what I'm saying. A couple of months ago, I decided I want to grow my hair a little bit as well because of lockdown or whatever, right? I don't have a problem with my hair. It grows, becomes much longer. For me, I don't really associate necessarily long hair with femininity. It's more prominent among females. I'm not denying that. But if someone wants to have long hair, I don't think that is a calling for transgenderism. I think that's just a calling for having long hair, right? You can enjoy having long hair and be a male.
Wait, so you were trying to say that there are no other internal psychological factors and tendencies contributing to a trans person's identity other than the desire to have long hair? How dumb and simplified can you make it? She was just sharing one example of how she felt she wanted to be more womanly, and to her, having long hair was an example of that. I mean, doesn't Islam say you have to wear hijab to cover that long hair? Isn't that part of the beauty of a woman hijab? There is some interesting tension here though. Some feminists want to reduce the importance of gender roles in our society, allowing more flexibility in what women can do and men can do, what women dress like and men dress like, and so on. Yet some trans activists want to keep the gender roles, because if gender roles are less relevant, then you could just call yourself a man and look like a woman and the distinction is meaningless. There's no need to transition. Personally, I think gender roles are valuable for the most part and are here to stay. This doesn't mean we can't create space for those who are gender neutral or don't fit in a traditional gender role, but we do acknowledge that gender roles are important to many people, transgender individuals included. Many of them believe in strict gender roles. Women do womanly things, men do manly things. It's just that they don't want to be in the role that they were born in. And then we should remember that different cultures tend to have different roles for men and women. Sometimes they have more than two gender roles. So there's no reason to be so uptight about this.
So when we started talking about what is a man and what is a woman, when I started mentioning a woman, a person who's giving birth in a hospital, who's 9 months pregnant, can they identify as a man? The argument of biology now, right, it seems to contradict this notion.
Mohammed Hijab needs to understand the difference between being female and being a woman. He's taking a scientific biological term, in this case female, which has fixed biological characteristics such as carrying a womb and giving birth, and using it interchangeably with a socially constructed gender identity, in this case woman. That's prone to flux and fluidity. Being male or female is just about describing a specimen's biological makeup, just like you can have male and female dolphins or puppies or horses. But do we assign gender roles to dolphins and puppies and expect them to behave in different ways? Then why should a human being's biological makeup determine the identity they have as a person, whether it's liking a specific color, doing or not doing makeup, liking girls or boys, and so on and so forth? I mean, just because a human being gives birth to a child doesn't mean that you get to assign all these other roles and expectations exclusively to them if they would prefer to identify differently. Again, debating about whether there should be gender roles or not is a different question. The real discussion here is whether these roles must be tied to you by birth. I think not.
Someone's like a type of white person who's good. He's got a good salary, and he's got a big house, and he's come out of Harvard or something like this, right? So everything is going well from the material sense, or in the material sense, for that person. And they come out and say, "I identify as black, and I want to have all the privileges that Black people have? To what extent would you accept this?
Not at all. Like
Yeah.
there's no reason, like, why, like, you can't. Do they have racial dysphoria? Is that a thing that scientists have cracked down on, that numerous doctors and professors and educated people across the world have vouched support for? No, that's just someone looking for attention.
Mohammed Hijab repeats this transitioning race thing multiple times. This is another lame conservative trope. How is this even related to the topic of gender identity? Your race is something that's determined 100% by your biology, and there's absolutely no role of other psychological or social factors here. Gender, on the other hand, is socially created and reinforced in different ways throughout different cultures. For example, did you know that men in the African Aka tribe look after the babies while the women hunt? These babies are even suckled by their fathers for comfort. They also cook and indulge in care work while the mothers are out hunting or setting camp. What more proof does one need that gender roles are not innate but are socially created and vary within each culture? So I hate to break it to you, Hijab, what you're trying to do is forcefully classify gender expression and gender identity into the same category as race by downplaying some rather crucial social and psychological aspects that determine one's gender identity. This is a problem with Islam, though. It sneaks in its own cultural values and claims it's superior. It doesn't even want to admit that these are cultural values. Interestingly, Alia had earlier mentioned the aspect of brain autonomy and psychology when she talked about being born with the XY set of chromosomes, but still having an inclination towards femininity and the traditional concept of womanhood. Sex is actually a combination of bodily characteristics, including chromosomes, hormones, internal and external reproductive organs, and secondary sex characteristics. This is where the role of psychology and other social influences also come into account. Of course, there is no denying that biology can play a role in determining the types of traits and habits we are drawn to and identify with, but we can establish that gender identity is not just a matter of biology, but also socio-psychological factors that are equally or perhaps even more important. To compare this with the race analogy is inappropriate because, unlike gender, race is strictly determined by our biology, not our psychology or any other social factors. Although whichever traits or aspects people may associate with a certain race is a product of social construction, your race is determined, innate, and cannot be affected by psychosocial factors. You aren't expected to behave differently as a black or white person. Well, I guess in some cultures you are, but this is a problem. This is a bad thing. Your gender, on the other hand, isn't fixed. It's socially constructed and is influenced by an endless spectrum of psychosocial factors.
Yeah, I understand. But if someone is very sympathetic towards Black people's struggle, someone who is practically immersed themselves in the culture of Black Lives Matter, and they feel from this experience that they genuinely are a Black person. They believe that they're a Black person. So would you respect them and would you call them a Black person if they call
no, because that is insulting to the actual experiences and oppression that Black people face. That white person isn't going to feel those things, has never felt those things. So for what reason are they Black?
Is he serious? He's desperately failing to make a point here, except that he absolutely cannot differentiate between a biological and a social phenomena. I have to say, the way Alia deals with this guy's questions, full of ease and confidence, is commendable. I mean, it's really not that complicated, is it?
But I'm talking about someone who doesn't have XXY, who does have XY chromosomes, just XY, right? And that individual, could they ever have the same experience as a woman who has monthly menstruation, who has XX chromosomes, and who's given birth, or who has the exact physiology of a woman, has estrogen in her body, and all of those things? Do you think that someone who is XY can have those experiences, exact experiences?
And this guy is hell-bent on sticking to the XY and XX explanations as the only determining factor of a person's gender identity, completely ignoring everything else. Here is Alia's answer.
I don't think that they can be the exact experiences as a cis woman, but I do not think that being a woman is dependent on menstruating and But to say that, like, when I go out and I get street harassed, I get cat calls, and when I go out into society as a woman, I am treated as a woman. So I do think that in most aspects, yes.
Spot on. There's literally nothing to add to this.
Okay. Say, for example, we go back to our white man analogy or the comparison.
Oh no, not race again.
Let's assume that the man is not fully white. That he has one grandparent who's actually black. So do you think now the man has entitlement to call himself black?
How is this even related to the topic at hand?
I do not think that I am the person to speak on that, considering I am not black myself. I don't think that it's appropriate for me to speak on black experiences.
No, accepted, but
Thank you.
what if he has a great grandparent?
It's still not my place to answer that.
What the hell is this guy even getting at?
If race is a social construct, then racism becomes a social construct as well, right? Likewise, if we say that sex is a social construct, then sexism is a social construct as well, and so on and so forth. So, and if the penis is some way a social construct, then rape becomes a social construct. So the social construct thing has no end, right? Which is why it's important to bring sanity back in the conversation with biology, right?
Wrong on so many levels that it's hard to digest. The consequences that people suffer as a result of their biology are not social construct. They are active undertakings in response to the things that we ourselves have socially defined in certain ways. Society defined certain races and genders as inferior. Does that make racism and sexism a social construct? No, it makes them very real forms of discrimination against what we arbitrarily assigned social meanings to. And don't even get me started on what he said at the end.
And if the penis is some way a social construct, then rape becomes a social construct.
I think I'll agree on the need to bring sanity back into the conversation.
And so when we talk about what is a man and what is a woman, what is a male and what is a female, I would submit to you that the strongest way of identifying this is a biological approach.
But the biological approach is not the only approach. A while later, they finally arrive on the Islamic perspective on homosexuality and trans people. When asked about the story of Lut or Lot in the Quran, Alia, like any other Muslim apologist, does her best to define it through the lens of a gentler interpretation, where God was only condemning rape and adultery and the immoral actions of Lot's people, not consensual sex between two adult men. My interpretation, of course, is that the Quran explicitly condemns homosexuality, and I see that in context with the Sunnah. You can't blame her. She's trying to be true to her identity as a trans woman and also true to her identity as a Muslim woman. I don't really care for these progressive Muslim or Quranist arguments. I really think they're silly and not held by many, so I'm not going to bother arguing about it. But if you look carefully, Lot offered his daughters to the men, and he wouldn't offer his daughters to rapists. So it's obviously an issue about homosexuality, not rape.
Something quite interesting, right? There's a verse in chapter 3, verse 7. منه آيات محكمات هن أم الكتاب وأخر متشابهات فأما الذين في قلوبهم زيغ فيتبعون ما تشابه منه ابتغاء الفتنة وابتغاء تأويله. So this verse is saying that from this book, there's two kinds of verses. منه آيات محكمات. There is the clear-cut verses. And these are the foundations of the book. These are the basis of the book, if you like. وأخر متشابهات. And other verses are ambiguous. فأما الذين في قلوبهم زيغ. As for those individuals in whose hearts there is diversion, if you like. فيتبعون ما تشابه منه ابتغاء الفتنة وابتغاء تأويله. They follow that which is ambiguous from it, seeking therefrom some kind of tribulation and seeking to apply interpretation, excessive interpretation to it. And no one can really interpret those ambiguous verses except for God.
So you're saying Allah purposely put ambiguous verses into the Quran, and the Quran also claims to be error-free and to be mubin, i.e. crystal clear, and when people try to interpret those ambiguous verses to the best of their knowledge, i.e. the verses that you said only God and no one else knows the meaning of, they're automatically sinning? Gotcha. This is one of the most clever get-out-of-jail cards ever. Muhammad wrote a book and then said nobody knows the meaning except God in those cases.
I mean, if you think about the act of homosexuals, I'm sorry to put this into a vivid format for you, but actually having sex, a man having sex with another man, for example, where the penis is going into the rectum repeatedly to the point where it could even injure the other person, and it's actually very painful. It must be very painful. That
It's very painful, is it? I hope you're not speaking from experience because that's haram. Even straight sex can be painful for the man or especially for the woman. It's all part of the dynamic of sex. Pain and pleasure to some extent. Even with men and women, some like anal, some don't. You must decide what works in your relationship. Is it not a stretch to confine someone's entire experience of being gay to a single sexual act and then use that as a basis to declare same-sex love as wrong? Is there not more to being in a relationship than just sex?
I mean, it's quite a selfish act.
And it's quite a selfish act? Bro, what are you on about? Sex is a two-way street. It's enjoyable, or it should be enjoyable for both parties. Otherwise, why are you doing it?
Islam is about submission. It's about submitting to one God. He knows what's best for you. Like, for example, if you had a problem, right? If your stomach started hurting very badly, right? And you start vomiting or whatever, and your skin started to change color. Maybe you start becoming a little bit darker. Okay, after you've gone to the Black Lives Matter protest, what would you do after that? You'd go to the doctor, right? I was just joking about that.
I have no idea why he said you get darker and go to a Black Lives Matter protest after you get stomach pain. That just seemed like an unnecessary racist dig. Disgusting and stupid comment, Hijab.
At the end of the day, it's for your best interest because you are convinced that the doctor is competent and knowledgeable to the extent where you're not. And I'm saying this to you, that when you are truly submissive to God, you have to be convinced that he is competent and knowledgeable to the extent where you're not, right? And that's why submission is a very powerful and beautiful thing.
No, it's not. It's called manipulation, brainwashing, and gaslighting, and there's absolutely nothing beautiful about that. The doctor knows best analogy for obeying God is so overused and exhausted by Muslims. I mean, if you ask a Muslim apologist to justify anything controversial or problematic in the religion, this is their favorite go-to argument, and by this point, it's just sad.
Do me one favor, okay? Do me one favor. Review this conversation and the questions that we've had, yeah? And make a prayer called istikhara prayer. Yeah, istikhara.
Yeah.
Istikhara. And ask Allah to guide you to the right path.
I know. I ask Allah that every
ask it one more time and ask him.
Yeah, I know. I will do it. But
yeah,
I think we should all be asking Allah to guide us.
Of course. I'll make dua for you, okay? So
Thank
that
you. And I'll make dua for you as well.
Yeah, I've said that already. See, I said it before you said it. Okay. And listen, if you've got any questions, please send them to me. Yeah.
Can religious people stop acting so arrogant all the time? Like, sure, even if you did sort of humanize her, minus all the inappropriate jokes, you're still condescending to her choices and identity by making it sound like she's on the wrong path and that you and your God know the right path for her. I mean, that's just offensive. The comments, of course, on this video, which are highly filtered Mohammed Hijab style, are all pretty negative. Most of them kept referring to Aliyah as he. One of them, with nearly 700 upvotes, made a threatening comment about let him try to go to pilgrimage and see what happens to him. Another one was mocking and said, I identify as a table, which is stupid because table is not a gender and there's no social role of being a table. And like I said, many transgender people, including the activist Blair White, are against the idea of unlimited genders. These are separate issues. So here are my final thoughts. I think it's high time that these conversations become normalized in the Muslim community, and credit on Hijab for trying despite the backlash he got. Given his stance as well as his audience, I feel like he did a good thing by giving Aliyah a platform to express her views as a Muslim trans woman. even if he kept pushing the XY chromosome argument or the what about transitioning race argument, or even at times making it seem like he's schooling her. You can find Alia on Twitter at the Trans Muslim. I'd like to give my support to Alia. I'm including a link to her transition fund. Being an activist, she is putting herself out there and she's in a very difficult position, getting heat from both sides. So please check it out and support her if you can. I'm sure she will appreciate it. Thanks for watching. This is your friendly ex-Muslim Abdullah Samir signing out. Don't forget to subscribe and like this video and leave a comment and let me know what you think about the topic.